Right. Good evening, everyone. I will call this meeting to order at 6:03. It's with great respect and humility. We acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people on which we are holding our meeting this evening. These are the lands that they've lived for thousands of years. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. We're grateful that these lands are where we are able to work each day and where many of us are raising our families. And also would like to acknowledge the other territories that are Hulkaminam speaking in which we serve, Snanawas and Staminas, as well as our Métis and Inuit relatives who work so hard to serve their communities in Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools as well. We do not have any transfer of items to the open meeting agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or change in order to the agenda this evening from trustees? Okay, I don't see any, so I will then ask, is there any objection to approving the agenda? Okay, with no objection, the agenda carries unanimously. Thank you. Approval of the minutes. That the minutes from the regular board meeting held on June 23rd, 2021 and the special board meeting held on September 1st, 2021 be adopted. Is there a mover? And or in the chat box would be great. Okay, it's been moved by Trustee Keller and seconded by Trustee Wilkinson. Is there any changes or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Section 8, that the Section 72.3 report from the closed board meeting on June 23rd, 2021 and September 1st, 2021 be received. Is there a mover? Trustee Robinson has moved the motion, and a second. Trustee Keller, is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. So we have a couple of announcements. The Education Committee meeting will be held October 6th. Business Committee meeting October 13th. Board of Education for October will be October 27th. The statutory holiday tomorrow, September 30th, and October 11th for Thanksgiving, and 2 non-instructional days for professional development for our staff this month in October on the 22nd and 25th. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that tomorrow is the first National Day of Recognition for Truth and Reconciliation, and invite anyone to join us at Swilana Lagoon, where we will be honored guests and partners of Snuneymuxw First Nation in their celebration, and the City of Nanaimo with the installation of a welcoming pool at Swilana and other activities where we can learn about Canada's history and consider how we can make a difference moving forward in the path of truth and reconciliation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge newly elected MP Lisa Marie Barron was successful in her bid for a federal seat in Parliament and has resigned her position as a school board trustee for Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. Trustee Barron has been deeply committed to the Nanaimo Ladysmith community, both in our schools and outside of our schools for a great number of years, and we appreciate the service that she's been able to provide these past few years in her elected position as trustee. We wish her well, and we look forward to seeing what her accomplishments look like. That moves us into new business on our agenda. 11.1, I will introduce Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh, who will introduce our guests from KPMG.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So it's my privilege to introduce Lenora Lee from KPMG, who did our audit or led our audit team this year from KPMG, who's going to review the financial statements as well as answer questions from the board. You see a recommended motion following that presentation to accept the financial statements. At the same time, I also do want to recognize the work of our financial department. We've got Ms. Lowe here as well as Ms. Hambley. And so just want to acknowledge the work that was done in creating the financial statement discussion and analysis document that you'll see on page 65 of the agenda. And I can say that that document is very likely to be the template for a number of other school districts. And so they'd be very proud of the work of staff in this regard. But perhaps I can turn it over to Ms. Lee to discuss the item on the agenda.
Sure, thank you for having me at your meeting tonight. I'll just provide a few summary level comments regarding the audit findings report and the financial statements. We are substantially complete the audit. We were working with management during most of August to prepare and complete all of the audit procedures in order to get to the status and point that we're at tonight. So we have no outstanding items other than the approval of the financial statements tonight, and we are prepared to finalize our auditor's report. As presented and in the package, you'll see that it is a clean and unqualified auditor's report. It indicates that there's no material errors in the financial statements and that they do present accurately the financial position and results of operations for the fiscal 2021 year. The financial statements are prepared on a consistent basis with previous years in terms of the policies and disclosures, and they do meet the requirements of the Ministry of Education as well as the province of BC in terms of the accounting framework. A couple highlights in terms of the financial statements themselves. As at June 30th, 2021, the school district had 46 million of total assets. That includes all three of its funds, operating, special purpose, and capital. And that represents about a 3.5 million increase from previous years. The increase is a result of a surplus for the year, as well as capital projects that are in progress and claims from the Ministry of Education for monies spent on capital programs to be collected. Total liabilities were 156 million, an increase of about 11 million on a year-over-year basis. And again, that represents funds that have been collected and received from the ministry for capital grants and not yet spent at the end of the year. As well, there was an increase in collections for international student tuition. That program has increased on a year-over-year basis with more students able to enter Canada and have study permits issued in fiscal 2021 as compared to 2020. Capital assets of the district were 179 million at the end of the year. That represents about a $9 million increase. It is comprised of about 18 million spent on various capital projects, including Hammond Bay, Dover Bay, Solaire, and certain childcare facilities, and 9 million of amortization expense or depreciation for the year. Overall, that left the school district at June 30th with an accumulated surplus of 70 million. Of that amount, 53 million has already been spent on capital projects and capital programs that are in use. There's about 5.2 million held in restricted capital for future capital improvements and projects. 10 million is held in targeted reserve funds that have been restricted for certain programs to be delivered in future years. And 3 million represents unrestricted operating surplus. And that's about 2% of annual expenses and well within the range recommended by the ministry and the school district's policy. So overall, the district is in a strong financial position. It certainly has sufficient assets to pay its existing liabilities at June 30th and sufficient cash flow to pay upcoming costs as well. I'd just like to echo also the thanks and appreciation to the finance team for all their support and assistance with conducting the audit. We were able to complete our procedures on a timely basis, on schedule, and very much appreciate the assistance and access to information and timeliness of responses by the finance team. I'm happy to address any questions related to the audit or financial statement.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lenora. Trustees, do we have questions on our audited financial statements for Lenora this evening? I don't see any questions at this time. So what I'd like to do, Lenora, is just acknowledge the relationship that we've had with KPMG the last couple of years, and in particular, having you come to the board the last few years, presenting to us. Thanks also should go to you. You've made our audited financial statements and the audit process very understandable for all of us. And so I appreciate your efforts to work with our staff, and I'm really happy that it's a reciprocal relationship and we work so well together. So thank you as well.
Thanks.
Trustee Stanley?
Hi, before I motion, I just would like to echo Chair McKay's comments. Ms. Lee, I don't think it's 7 years of listening to you say similar things. I think you have an incredible ability of translating what is a foreign language to me into easily understandable pieces of information that are necessary for us to make the decision on this. So I really appreciate your ability to translate this for us in a clear way. And if it pleases the chair, I'd be happy to move the motion on this.
Please go ahead.
Okay, that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, receive and approve the 2020-2021 audited financial statements.
Thank you. Do we have a second for the motion? Seconded by Trustee Wilkinson. Trustee Stanley, did you want to speak to the motion?
I don't think that's necessary. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Great. All right, are there any questions on the motion from the board? Seeing no questions, I will ask if there's any objection to the motion this evening. All right, with no objection, the motion carries. So I will once again send you my thanks, Ms. Lee, and thanks to our finance staff. I know a lot of work goes into this document that gets put together on an annual basis. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so that moves us on into the correspondence section of our agenda. Okay, so 12.1. We have a letter from Ombudsperson J. Chalk. Hopefully I said that right. Probably not. That the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, refer the correspondence from the Ombudsperson to be received and filed. Is there a mover? Moved by Trustee Higginson and seconded by Trustee Stanley. Is there any objection to that motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. 12.2. Letter from Honorable Katrina Chen, that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, refer the correspondence from Honorable K. Chen to be received and filed. Mover? Moved by Trustee Robinson and seconded by Trustee Stanley. Is there any objection to the motion? With no objection, the motion carries unanimously. I'm going to group the following motions together. That the Board of Education that the Board of Education of School District number 68 refer the correspondence items 12.3, 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, 12.9, 12.10, and 12.11 to the board chair for response. Is there a mover? Moved by Trustee Robinson and seconded by Trustee Higginson. Is there any discussion on the motion? Trustee Stanley?
Thank you. I actually had a question about 12.10. Can I ask it in this omnibus motion?
Sure.
I just wanted to inquire, the community had made a number of suggestions, which I recognize the vast majority are actually for the city of Nanaimo to address, but there were some that were relevant for our school district. And I'm wondering sorry, I'm just actually trying to find my notes on this, if there were any plans for follow-up on that, or just kind of, what were the next steps, or are there about the school district related recommendations?
For sure. So that's a great question. So the correspondence, if this motion were to pass from the chair, would be to include those next steps as well. So it's a good question. What we have been doing already is we've had some staff meetings. We have staff connected with the community. We have staff connected with the school, and we've also connected with the city of Nanaimo on these. And so what I've understand to be at the beginning of the process is that the Parent Advisory Council will be reaching out to the city with these recommendations alongside of the community, and our staff are going to look at the recommendations as a component of a larger active transportation review to revisit work that's been done at that school previously. So there will be next steps, and we want to update the community members in response to their letter on those next steps and the actions that we're looking for staff to take, or that they're already taking.
Great, thank you. It's appreciated to understand the follow-up on that. I'm grateful that there is follow-up, so thank you.
Wonderful, you're welcome. Trustee Keller.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Trustee Stanley took my question, and I appreciate that she asked it. That's pretty much exactly what I was going to ask, but I'll take this opportunity to ask my second question. And it's with respect to, and please be patient, I'm switching between screens here. Item number 12.3 regarding day custodians in schools. And I just was hoping to ask through the chair to staff if you could please advise what the status is, so I have a better understanding. As I understand it, we did have a certain allocation of day custodial last year, and I'm not quite clear on what's changed since then. So I was hoping that staff could help answer that question.
Okay. Thank you. So I think we can provide that clarity, and hopefully that'll support your decision on the motion. Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this year we planned again to go back to the pre-COVID custodial runs with the idea that we'd be able to see what the requirements were when the ministry issued them. So we did do some pre-purchase of supplies, et cetera, The ministry has provided some money that we did spend on those supplies as well as filtration. The board saw on September 1st, and then ultimately with the passage of the financial statements tonight will be the kind of final support, although we've already been doing it, with it adding additional between 8 and 12 FTE to our custodial in order to meet the ministry guidelines. What that does, however, though, is not reinstitute daytime custodians where they weren't in prior to COVID times, but rather allow us to meet the requirements of the ministry with respect to high-touch surfaces. And so what we've got is the FTE are mainly focused on additional evening folks, as well as emergency, or emergent issue crews to be able to go out. So if we get an exposure notice, immediately we have a crew to be able to go and make sure that that space is clean. We have not contemplated going back to the daytime model. Be slightly more expensive than the board has or is being recommended to finally allocate, but as well as we are a little bit concerned about the staffing issues that may be accorded with that. So certainly we couldn't turn tomorrow and do that if we were directed to. We'd be able to work it out in time, no doubt. But the idea is to meet the requirements with additional up to 12 FTE that's supported in the recommendations that you'll see later.
Does that answer your question, Trustee Keller?
It does. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions related to the motion? Seeing none, I'll ask is there anyone opposed to the motion? With no one opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That takes us to 12.7, that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, refer the correspondence from, I'm going to apologize in advance, so I would really like to say your name properly. H. Quaxistala be received and filed. Is there a mover? Trustee Robinson moves the motion and seconded by Trustee Stanley. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right. 12.8, that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, refer the correspondence from B. Churcher to the Board Chair for response. Is there a mover? Moved by Trustee Stanley and seconded by Trustee Wilkinson. Is there any questions on the motion? Seeing no questions, is there any opposition to the motion? With no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That concludes our correspondence component of our agenda this evening. So we move into business committee reports. I'll invite Trustee Keller for 13.1.1 exempt compensation.
Thank you, Chair. So if I may, I'll read the motion. The first motion, 13.1.1 exempt compensation, reads that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, receive the executive compensation report as information and direct the board chair to sign an attestation letter attached as Appendix C acknowledging compensation paid to executive staff during the 2020-2021 fiscal year.
Great, thank you. Trustee Keller has moved the motion and a second by Trustee Robinson. Is there any questions on the motion? With no questions on the motion, I will ask, is there anyone opposed? So no one opposed, the motion carries unanimously. For a clarifying question on process, I'm just going to acknowledge there's a question in the chat. The correspondence I moved as a large motion, including multiple correspondence items. To Trustee Stanley's questions, wasn't there more? The motion for board chair response included 12.3, 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, 12.9, 12.10, and 12.11. Just wanted to provide that clarity. Trustee Keller, over to you for 13.1.2.
Thanks, Chair. I'll read that second motion, that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, allocate $2,000 to each elementary school for classroom resources, and that any of these funds unspent at June 30th, 2022 be restricted and returned to the school for future resource allocations.
Thank you. Trustee Brzovic has seconded the motion. Did you want to motivate the motion?
Maybe just briefly, and just mention that we did receive a action sheet at the business committee earlier this month. We had a good debate, and overall, I think this is an important motion for us to consider to help support teachers, especially when setting up new classrooms at the elementary level. And so I am in support of this motion.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other comments or debate on the motion? Trustee Stanley?
Thanks. I just want to express my support of the motion as well as my gratitude. I believe that it was Trustee Keller, but quite a long time, asked us to consider looking into this issue further, and that has led us to the situation that we're in now. So I do appreciate that Trustee Keller asked us to take that second look about what's happening with resources in our schools, and I'm grateful that we've been able to follow up on that issue. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other comment or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there anyone opposed to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. 13.1.3, over to you, Trustee Keller.
Thank you. So we have two motions under this section, and I'll read the first one. I'll read them one at a time. So the first one reads as follows: that the Board of Education of School District Number 68 in Nanaimo Ladysmith, in accordance with the provisions under Section 142 Sub 4 of the School Act, approve the proposed minor capital plan for 2022-2023 as provided to be submitted to the Ministry of Education.
Thank you. Do we have a second on that motion? Trustee Wilkinson has seconded the motion. Thank you. Did you want to speak to that motion, Trustee Keller?
No, not at this time, Chair. We had a presentation by Secretary Treasurer Walsh, and along with an action sheet and discussion at the Business Committee. So I think there's should be a good understanding of this motion.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other discussion, so I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Trustee Keller?
Thank you. For the second motion under this section, that reads that the Board of Education of School District Number 68 in Nanaimo Ladysmith write a letter to the Minister of Education support for the replacement of NDSS and support for appropriate seismic, environmental, ventilation, and condition upgrades, including potential replacement for Ladysmith Intermediate.
Okay, thank you. And I see that that's been seconded by Trustee Stanley. Did you want to speak to this motion?
If I may, just briefly, and I want to just express how important this motion is when it comes to meeting the needs of our students and working towards the goals of our long-range facilities plan. And I think that our board, through this motion, can play an important advocacy role to try and move these projects forward. So I appreciate this opportunity and will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. So I'm on the speakers list as the next speaker. I would like to just state my support for this motion. I believe that the Nanaimo District Secondary School community has been waiting for a very long time for a replacement school and a replacement facility. You know, we can look at this facility in a multitude of different ways, including project by project. However, I think it's most effective for our board to continue our advocacy towards a replacement for that building. And recognizing that the same consideration needs to be given to Ladysmith Intermediate School as well. The needs are great on those buildings, and we need to advocate for the capital needs of our district. So I appreciate this motion being brought forward and moved by Trustee Keller. Trustee Brzovic.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with you, and I will support the motion. I just want to get a point of clarification. When it speaks to condition upgrades, specifically in terms of Ladysmith Intermediate, would that allow us to bring up questions or concerns around accessibility issues?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if it needed to be a separate reference or if it would just come under conditions.
Yeah, we would include that with conditions. Thank you for clarifying that.
I was there today and I almost didn't get in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was highlighted on our recent tour with MLA Rotley, was to look exactly at that. So thank you for that. Trustee Stanley.
I'm also in strong support of this motion. You know, I look forward to some significant advocacy from this board with regards to the replacement of these two schools. Replacement is clearly the most cost-effective and resource-effective method of addressing the building conditions that we're dealing with these, and I'll say it repeatedly, 70-year-old buildings of NDSS. And at our tour of Ladysmith Intermediate, it was determined that it was at least part of it. The core was 66-year-old buildings. And so these buildings are well past their lifespan. And I look forward to doing the best we can for our communities and our students. Thanks.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Practice with this new system, or I'm not in practice, I'm not in routine yet. it probably goes without saying, but it's not said in the motion that we should be CCing these letters to our local MLAs as well, because this is going to be a team effort to make this happen. I appreciate that some of our MLAs recently toured buildings with us in their areas, but I do think we need to CC these letters to our local MLAs as well. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Absolutely. An important notation to make, and our intention is to do just that. So do we have any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question on the motion. Is there anyone opposed? With no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Trustee Keller, for the reports from the Business Committee. 13.2, Education Committee. Trustee Berzovich.
I've got it right here. Thank you. That the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the Policy Committee work plan as amended to include childcare policy for 21-22 as attached.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Trustee Robinson has seconded the motion. Trustee Berzovich, did you want to speak to the motion?
I'll just speak briefly. I think that the committee has worked pretty hard to take into consideration all the priorities that trustees have brought forward, and I think it's a very good plan, and I think we can manage it. And I just look forward to seeing us move forward on these policy initiatives.
Great, thank you. Is there any other comment on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? With no one opposed, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Trustee Berzovich. Moving into senior staff reports, 14.1, Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And on page 144 and 145 of the agenda, and 146 and 147 is recommended motion with respect to recommendation staff are bringing forward for the board to consider for expenditures to support the board's goals. A couple of points to make, and I know we may not have a ton of folks watching out there, but when they do go watch later, it's important to add some context to some of these recommendations that we're making. So during the business committee, we also had an information sheet, that outlined a number of important facts about what you don't see on this particular list. So I'm going to highlight that just for a moment before we get into questions, if that's okay. So it's September 1st, staff came to the board to report on a number of items that we were projecting to be using funds that went over the summer, funds that we had on July 1st to be able to support for this school year. Some of them were board supported back in August, back at the budget time. So for instance, supporting community school coordinators was funded then, supporting outreach in the summer, supporting additional outreach this fall, supporting a huge investment in COVID response of nearly $1 million. Those are items that you're not seeing here. Items that you're also not seeing here are monies that are going to support mental health from the Ministry of Education direct grants, money that's supporting professional development that was carried forward, etc. So highly recommend if there's interest in going back and having a look at that information sheet. What we have here is essentially the board, when all of the expenditures in the budget are paid for, and at the end of the year, last year, then we put aside some of those funds that I just talked about, so money that is rolling forward for various initiatives. We had approximately $1.8 million in unrestricted surplus available to the district to spend on priorities in this fiscal year. Combined with that, and our auditors briefly touched on it, but combined with that we have something called the benefits premium balance. So we set aside a certain amount of money in order to ensure that teachers and QP staff and exempt and principals, etc., we're able to fund dental and medical that we have to pay. And we pay more the more they're used. And so in years that they're used less, for instance, COVID, a lot of people couldn't go to the dentist or get massages, etc. We started to build up a balance in that particular area that was frankly higher than it needs to be. So we've gone back to Hub, who is the external group, to ask them how much they suggest we maintain in that balance, and they suggest about 3 months of expenditure, so around $2.8 million. So we were sitting on slightly over $5 million in that pot, and so what we're recommending is we take the approximately $8 million surplus, operating surplus, unallocated, plus the difference between what we have in our benefits balance surplus and that 3-month total, and expend it on priorities to meet board goals and serve, use that money now. And so what we're seeing in these recommendations are 17 specific recommendations on for the board to contemplate to expend those funds. And perhaps, again, just for folks that are going to want to have a quick look over the tape, I'll go over them. Or Chair, should I do that? Should I? Okay. So again, you'll see the list of 17 is there, and I will note the 17th recommendation, which is the school site acquisition fund, is less than it was presented at the business committee meeting. And that is because the recommendation that we received from our external partner about maintaining that benefits balance, it turns out that we were intending to spend a little bit more than they recommend that we spend. And so the difference between the committee meeting and the board meeting is reflected in number 17. So happy to take questions.
Thank you. So the board had an opportunity to take a look at this, dive in, ask some questions of the business committee, and now we have another opportunity to ask questions about this information and allocation related to the motion that's in your agenda this evening. So I see Trustee Higginson has a question. She can start us off this evening.
Microphone. I'm having a hard time tonight. So my first question is about how our various board contingency funds that we allocated in our budget process last spring are doing. We all know we're in a bit of a different situation than we thought we would be in. So I'm wondering if our contingency funds that we allocated are keeping up with the current needs.
Through Madam Chair, so with the exception of essentially all of the contingency funds that we have will be expended, but I'll back that up a little bit. So the board holds aside, it's been traditionally $1.5 million for in case we end up with an inordinately high number of absences that we have to fund, or alternatively a surprise staffing issue. So we have $1.5 million. That $1.5 million is completely untouched at this point. So that's our true emergency fund. So if all of a sudden, so we're about to put in our CE, our classroom education fund ask, and we're going to ask for, we think we can support every single dollar that we're asking for. But if the ministry comes back and says, nope, we're not going to support this, we've got a backup to be able to go to for an emergency. Or alternatively, we had a large move to, I don't know, ICE as an example, and it's too late for us to get additional funding to support that, we would have that support. So we still maintain $1.5 million of essentially staffing contingency. When we do staffing at the kind of day-to-day level, we have a small contingency of 4. I mean, it's a very internal number. We keep a small contingency of 4. We've actually already overspent that by 2 FTE. And the reason we've been able to do that is because what we have is a situation where we do have some increasing enrollment, and not every penny of that increasing enrollment has to flow to that. So we get a little bit of overhead money per student. That money is going to be able to support that little bit of negative contingency. So we had ICE has a higher number of elementary school kids than we anticipated. Well, it's got lots of staff in secondary. We needed to put more staff in elementary. We also added some more EA time to support some need areas that we had already expended our contingency on, and so we moved some of that. So those contingency pots, that's in the negative, but our kind of emergency pot is untouched. I think that probably it would respond.
Okay, so I don't see a follow-up there, so I'll go to Trustee Stanley.
Hi, and that actually works well because I'm going to follow up on that staffing contingency conversation. I will say with regards to these recommendations for the surplus, you know, they're exciting. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of really great stuff in there. My only the cautious side of me is, you know, is it too good? And I want to just ask and inquire about a conversation we touched on before, but that is the additional challenges that we're finding in our schools at the kindergarten level because of COVID, and that how a lot of these students haven't necessarily gone through preschool in a way that, you know, they would when COVID wasn't around, and may have more challenging times with transitions into kindergarten because of that. So I just want to ask, given that challenge, how are we meeting that need? Do we have sufficient funds to address those concerns? Is there should I be worried that we should pull some money from the recommendations into that area? I just want to kind of throw that out there and either hear that we need to address it or get some reassurance that we are addressing it.
Great, thank you.
So perhaps through you, Madam Chair, if I could just address the financial aspect, and perhaps the superintendent would, if there's specifics on the K issue. But again, I think what I've noted is that we've already gone into a negative balance in our typical day-to-day staffing. So we've already spent more staffing than we normally would at this time. Normally, we do not use that contingency of 4. That's again that internal contingency because we hold it back in case second semester's in trouble. But because not in trouble, in case second semester has unanticipated needs. But because of increased enrollment, and frankly, because we have such a positive increase in our international program, we're actually anticipating that we have a little bit, we would be able to react if we needed. The other thing to keep in mind is the board's decision last year to up the contingency of EA time. That's a significant increase that happened in April. And so we're tracking, I don't have today's numbers, but we're actually tracking almost a little bit less than projections on special needs. And so that would have meant less money. But we're not looking at having to go in and grab any of those supports to move around because of the board's support in April. So there's almost a front-end loading, which is exactly the intention of what we did in April, in addition to some of the movement of using that contingency because we have that a little bit of enrollment. The other thing is, and I just noted about that we do have our outstanding emergency contingency, and we typically want to have that for absolute catastrophic issues. It's not necessarily intended to address increased need, it's more catastrophic issues. But if the superintendent came and said to the board, I need 5 teachers for X, because a number of the items in the recommended motions are capital based, we do have the ability to come back and say at a later time, we can't afford to pay for the supports we need. Maybe we better pull back on this at a later time and come back to the board and ask to essentially reallocate the funds from one of the board's areas. So I can't speak to exactly how we're addressing all of the needs that you just asked about, but I can speak to the fact that we feel like we're able to change course if we need, relatively easy.
Trustee Stanley, did that answer your question, or did you also want to hear from the superintendent on the learning side?
Oh, that's a tough question. Yes and yes. I was looking about the flexibility that we are able to meet those needs, but I'm not going to deny or reject getting more information about how we're meeting students' needs. So you offered.
Great. Superintendent.
Well, thank you through you, Madam Chair. I think Secretary Treasurer Walsh answered that question quite well. I think, and thank you for the question, Trustee Stanley. I appreciate the concern, and the needs aren't insignificant. I would just add that given the increase in enrollment across the district, and the numbers aren't quite in, September 30th is close at hand, and afterwards we'll have a better idea, of course, but and a really significant increase in international student enrollment. I think we'll have enough of a buffer. In fact, I know we will have enough of a buffer to be able to address those needs, such as they are. So I think we're in a pretty good position for some unforeseen circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer has another comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you, Ms. Hamley sent me a note quickly just to say that the numbers on the designation side, and again, this is all ending tomorrow, right? So actually looks like it's coming in pretty healthy. So there will be more funds to be able to replenish contingency funds too. So that's a positive.
Trustee Stanley, follow-up question?
No, I think I've had enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Keller, your next question.
Yeah, thank you. I have a comment and a question, if that's okay.
Of course.
So I guess my comment is just a reminder, I suppose, that these are unrestricted surplus dollars that we're talking about, which, as I understand it, are best suited to one-time expenses versus ongoing expenses like additional FTE. Because I know there's needs across the district for potential additional positions, but we don't want to be spending surplus on those as part of our operating budget. So I just wanted to make that comment because I know it looks, like we're awash in money, and it is surplus. It's not operating. So anyway, my question is through the chair to staff, just for clarification. The board just passed a motion in response to providing $2,000 to elementary classrooms, and I just want to confirm how that relates to item 10, because it looks like there might be some overlap there, but I just want to confirm.
Through Madam Chair, it's this same item. It's just that the way it came forward at the business committee was in response directly to the board directing staff to report back on that item on its own to the business committee. So it is the same item. And perhaps I could just say that thank you very much for the reminder that these are one-time items. You'll notice that there is a few places where we are looking at staffing, and those are areas that we would actually be wanting to look at on an ongoing basis. And if we had resources available to us, we certainly would be coming to the board next year. For instance, the example of the SST at ICE, that's an example of we probably want to maintain that position if we're in that financial position next year. Obviously, if we're not, it's one time, but that's a need, a gap that we've seen that we're trying to address immediately and then come back with a longer term solution.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Trustee Keller?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. So I apologize that I was away for the business committee meeting. I did watch it, but the question that I have was sort of loosely touched upon, but not exactly. So under the CESS allocation, it doesn't specifically mention being able to support a proposed project from Natsmat Tadlat, which is a project that was asked for by the CESS family. And so I'm wondering if there's any reason why the descriptor would prevent that possibility, because it also then does say in there sort of like to be determined. And so, but it only specifically mentions allocating this money to the school level. And So I'm just wondering if there's anything that would prevent some of these funds being allocated to that Nutsmut Tilot project if that's determined to be the right course of action. Or if we should put in a small amendment to recognize, not that it would, but just that it doesn't have to just be school based. So I'm just trying to figure that out.
Thank you for the question. Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So no, indeed, it was not intended to be restrictive in that way. It's just the way that I drafted it. In fact, the superintendent and I have already discussed the fact that I would like to allocate some funds to facilities as well to be able to support SEIETSAS. So I wasn't intended to be limited in the way that it's drafted. Clearly, the intent was to try to not have it be centrally driven, I think is what we're trying to avoid. Have it be from schools, have it be from facilities, have it be from the various departments.
Okay. Any follow-up on that? No. Okay. Thank you. All right. So that concludes my speakers list. However, I recognize that I have 3 more questions from Trustee Higginson. So go ahead.
Thank you. I am super excited about the outdoor learning, and I am also really critically aware of the importance of outdoor learning to our commitment to learning from the land, and wondered if it is the intention from our Learning Services Department to connect to that outdoor learning fund to CASS learnings, or have it be somehow, what we're trying to do with CASS, and we're all there, so we all know this, I don't need to really say it to this group, but for the public, is to create opportunities to have ongoing meaningful change that will be sustained. And so looking to connect those learning opportunities at any time that we can, particularly about the land. And it seems to me that it's such a good, they work so well together, that outdoor learning opportunity. And I just wonder if there's any thought to having those 2 things sort of have to work hand in hand together. An outdoor learning space would need to, have an elder come and ensure that there are native plants and gardens and things like that. So I'm just wondering if that's been thought of.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to send that question to the superintendent.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, you said, Trustee Higginson said that very well, and I certainly appreciate the suggestion. We've treated those 2 significant allocations of resource as meeting 2 of our very significant goals. They are certainly connected, learning from the land and environmental stewardship. We're hoping that they're connected. We see this as one rather large part of money to help schools understand the importance about healing and honoring the land and our CASS framework. So Trustee Higginson is once again bang on. Thank you.
Great. I don't think there's a follow-up there. That was a great segue. Trustee Higginson, you have another question.
Thanks. Way to suck up to the boss there, big guy. So pardon me if this was specifically answered. I did watch the business committee meeting after it happened, but for various reasons don't remember all the answers. So specifically on the crossing guard, or on the ENO, the École North Oyster allocation for traffic safety, is there part of that allocation intended to be a crossing guard, since it does say significant traffic safety issues in the write-up?
Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Through you, Madam Chair, the moment that this is voted on this evening, finance staff will transfer those funds to ENO, who will then staff the crossing.
Great, thank you. That's my fault. It's my fault.
I can't help but note the link to, and perhaps this is more of a comment, but I'm not sure. The link, there's the Frank J. Ney comment letters in about traffic safety issues. We have the Ecole North Oyster mentioned in this allocation. I know that I hear about it regularly at my own child's elementary school. I live on the street. So also I hear about it a lot at Ladysmith with the primary and the secondary school right together around site safety. And I wonder if there's any, is there a plan to have, or do we have, and I just don't know about it right now, an overall plan for site safety in the district? Because I know one allocation in this plan, but I don't know if we have an overall plan to deal with all these various one-off situations we have.
So through you, Madam Chair, so no, we don't have an overall plan. And thank you for the question, because the reason trustees see Eno as a recommendation is because we've actually taken steps, have a plan, and the steps involve actual investment in infrastructure. The Frank J. Ney plan, for instance, has a plan, but it does not involve, at least the one that the city came up with our assistance, with the community, does not involve infrastructure investments. But there are two things to add to that. One is that the board does support facilities with funds to do active transportation on a yearly basis. And typically, and now the long-range facilities plan also references the need to have an active transportation plan. So the answer is we do not have one, and it's going to be school by school by school, and likely targeted at the schools that have issues associated with them. And you can see a direct result of doing the studies means that we're recommending investments as the time comes. So clearly, Ney and that's ironically is one with a plan, and hopefully that plan can be really encouraged. And then Cedar will be on the list. Park Avenue is another one we've heard. Departure Bay has had one, but I think they've got a lot more kids than they did when it got done. So it's processing, and in future years, if we're in the same positive position, you may well see further asks to support the infrastructure that's actually recommended by those plans.
Excuse me, Chair, but you're muted.
Trustee Keller, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I just wanted to, I was not able to. Can now, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to point out that that long range facilities plan committee is going to be a place where we can also talk about active transportation in relation to the recommendations that are on the long range facilities plan. And hopefully that'll include a discussion around the process of how do we come up with an active transportation plan at our school, how do we revisit it, and all that kind of stuff, so we can build a really good system for all schools to be able to access. But I wanted to add that because I thought it was important. We have a place for those conversations now. I think that's something to celebrate. Are there any other questions related to the recommended motion in our agenda? Trustee Stanley, is that a question? Nope, that was an answer that you could hear me. That's fantastic. Thank you. All right, so I see no further questions. Trustee Keller would like to move the recommendation. Trustee Keller?
Thank you. As I catch up with trying to get my microphone and camera on. Okay. So the motion reads that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the recommendations contained in the action sheet to allocate the unrestricted surplus and benefit premium balance to support the board goals.
It's been seconded by Trustee Stanley. If you'd like to motivate the motion, Trustee Keller.
Just briefly, we've had a lot of discussion on this in the business committee and this evening, so I appreciate that. I find we're really fortunate to be in this position to be able to allocate these surplus funds, and I'm very pleased that we are able to do so, and I guess just thanks to staff for their hard work and prudent financial management to put us in this position. So I will be in support of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Keller. Is there any other comment or discussion on the motion? Okay, I don't see any further discussion or questions, so I will call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? With no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Walsh will be moving into business with us regarding South Wellington Public Consultation Report. I'm just going to pause for a moment. Trustee Keller?
Yes, Chair, I'd just like to declare a conflict, and so I'll not be participating in this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Keller. Trustee Stanley?
I too need to declare a conflict as a member of the South Wellington Community and Community Association. It's directly related to some of the other work that I do, so I will not be participating in this debate.
Okay. Thank you for the declaration. And so just for the clarity of anybody who might be watching our meeting, our trustees are welcome to sit and listen to the debate amongst the remainder of the trustees that are attending in order to determine the path forward. So with that, Secretary Treasurer Walsh, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's with pleasure that we're making the recommended motion that the board sees in the agenda, and that is to apply to the Minister of Education pursuant to Section 5 to dispose of South Wellington on a long-term lease basis to RDN. And so what this means is that I won't go through the process because it is there in the action sheet as well as on the website. But what the board is required to do when it's determining whether to dispose of land is have a public consultation process, which we did. And granted, it was relatively minor because it was not a very controversial action in that the recommendation, I think, responds to many of the concerns that we've heard from the community. And I would say that it's a unanimous support from all feedback that we've received, both in person as well as in writing. What will happen is if the board passes this motion, the chair will then write to the Minister of Education seeking approval of the lease, and the draft lease is attached. We note that there's one aspect of the lease that we do have some doubts whether the ministry will approve, but the lease will survive if that one aspect is not approved, and that's the ability to have a right of first refusal of purchase, not that we would be recommending the sale in that 25-year term. So in the event that the minister approves, then it will come back to the board for an actual bylaw for the disposition. Now, how long that process takes at the ministry, we're not quite sure. They know it is coming, so it shouldn't be very controversial in our estimation. RDN has its own processes that are either about to happen or happening in the very near future. And then ultimately, when the minister gives their approval, the bylaw happens on our end. RDN follows their proper public processes. We sign on the lease. There's an execution timeline. The RDN will take it over, do their upgrades, and we'll see it again in 25 years.
Great. Thank you for that. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. To the chair, I'd like to move the recommendation that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, apply to the Minister of Education for ministerial approval pursuant to Section 5 of the disposal of land or improvements order for a long-term lease of the former South Wellington Elementary School in the Regional District of Nanaimo.
Thank you. That's been seconded by Trustee Berzovich. Did you want to motivate the motion, Trustee Higginson?
You know, there's been lots of discussion on this, and I really appreciate the response that staff had when the board sort of intervened at the last minute to the possibility of having the building torn down. And just that, you know, my only regret that it's taken this long for us to really be able to do something for this community with this building. And I'm very excited for South Wellington to be able to have the use of this space back for their community. It really is an example of how a school is the heart of a community, particularly rural ones. And it was really felt when the school was closed. And so all these years later, it's nice for us to partner again with the community to be able to provide them with this, space that's really critical, and that they've expressed to us very clearly that it's going to be critical to the development of their community. And so I'm really looking forward to us turning a new page with the community and working closely with them on creating a really wonderful space. And I'm also really thankful to the RDN for their partnership on this project. I think it's a really great example of what we can do when two levels of government come together. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to speak in support of this motion. I think what stands out to me the most is that through the process of building the long-range facilities plan, we heard a great deal from the community that partnership is important, how we treat our land and consider its use is important. Working with community and being able to be responsive in a manner that that fits with our values, which is shown in that plan. By endorsing the long-range facilities plan, we endorsed all of those recommendations as things that we value, and this is an opportunity for us to put that into action. And I appreciate everyone's work that's gone into it. I appreciate the advocacy from the community, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds. So we'll like to send this off to the minister and see where that takes us next. Trustee Berzovich.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn my camera on. I just will speak in support of the motion as well and concur, of course, with everything that's been said. I just want to reiterate, I think what means the most to me and what's got me feeling a bit emotional here is this is a real opportunity to build some bridge that I believe we've begun to build a bridge, and we've begun to do some healing in a community that was very hurt by a lot that happened in the past. I remember what a struggle it was with South Wellington, how many times that school was up for closure, and then it finally was. And this is just, we finally tackled this, I think, in a good way.
Thank you for those comments. I don't see any other speakers on the list, so I will call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? So with no opposition, the motion carries unanimously, noting that Trustee Keller and Trustee Stanley have abstained from their vote. Thank you. We have no unfinished business this evening. Under section 16 for information, we have a board motions report, trustee committees report, and a vandalism report. Are there any questions from trustees on those items? Seeing no questions, Ms. Matthews, are there any questions from the public? No questions for question period, so I will look to trustees for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Robinson moves the motion. Trustee Higginson seconded it. Mostly because she popped up on my screen and I assumed. Is there any opposition to adjournment? Seeing none, that concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you very much.